Hi everybody, so today we're going to be talking about sickle cell anemia. And basically what sickle cell anemia is an inherited condition in which the cells, your red blood cells, change shape and can lead to anemia. So let's talk about this real quick. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a red blood cell. I'm going to draw this a little bit bigger. So here's my red blood cell. Okay, there's my red blood cell. And basically, for the most part, red blood cells are round. They are flexible. They live about 120 days. Okay, they live about 120 days. And the reason we have them is they carry oxygen. Okay, we're going to talk about this in just a minute, okay? So this is my red blood cell, and inside your red blood cells, you have something that is called hemoglobin. Okay, we have hemoglobin. And basically, let me draw this hemoglobin. You have about, and just so you know, you have about 250 million hemoglobin in your red blood cells, per red blood cell. And each one carries 4 molecules of oxygen, so each red blood cell can actually carry a billion molecules of oxygen, which I think is pretty fascinating. So anyways, inside this red blood cell, we have the hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin is made up of proteins. And on the inside of each one of these, you actually have iron that the oxygen is going to bond with, okay? This is basically the most common hemoglobin in the red blood cell is hemoglobin A, okay? And hemoglobin A is made up of 2 alpha globins, okay, 2 alpha globin, and also 2 beta globin. So this is my beta globin. All right, so now, what happens is, in sickle cell anemia, is basically these are all connected together. I have them a little bit apart there. But what's going to happen in sickle cell anemia is there is going to be a mutation to the beta globins. And these are going to be change shape. We call it misshapen, okay? So I'm just, instead of being square, I'm just going to, I'm round, I'm just going to draw these square now, okay? So you can see it's a different shape. So for the most part, these are now a different shape. For the most part, this can still carry oxygen throughout the body. Oh, the one thing I forgot to say. So now when we have this mutation and we have the change in the shape here, we no longer call this hemoglobin A, which by the way is abbreviated HbA. We now call it hemoglobin S, and we abbreviate HbS. For the most part, with this, it can still carry oxygen. It can still function normally, okay? But the problem's going to arise a little bit later on, and we'll talk about that. We said this can live 120, well, first we said this is round and flexible. This is going to be my sickle cell. Is going to be rigid. It's going to be sticky. It's going to be fragile, and these are going to break very easy. Okay? If you recall, we said these live 120 days. These live about 10 to 20 days. And we're going to see why that's a problem in just a few minutes. These carry oxygen. This can still carry oxygen. It can still function normally, okay, for a certain period of time. As you can see, though, because of the fact that this only lives 10 to 20 days, we don't have enough oxygen going around our body, and we call this anemia. Okay, hence the name sickle cell anemia. So let's talk about how we get the sickle cell shape now. In your red blood cell, like we said, we have those globins, right? Here's what happens is the way that the blood normally works is I have a blood vessel, and you get to something called a capillary, and your red blood cells go through capillaries. And when they go through capillaries, one of the things that happen is oxygen comes out of the red blood cell. And usually your cells will use this to make energy. Okay, so here comes my oxygen out of here. My O2, O2, O2 is coming out of here and going into whatever tissue is needed. Here's what's going to happen when we have sickle cell anemia. Is my oxygen, my red blood cells are going to go in, and then they're going to give up the oxygen, just like they should, right? There goes my oxygen. When they give up their oxygen now, what happens is they will change shape, and they will become a sickle cell shape. All right, so now they're sickle cell shaped. Okay, so they were carrying oxygen fine until they lost the oxygen, and now they have the sickle cell shape. So let's talk about what happened between here and here. If you remember, we talked about those beta globins that we have in our body, right? And so imagine that you're in the inside of the red blood cell, and here's my beta globin, right? In fact, I'm going to draw it square again because that's what I drew it before because it's misshaped. So here's my beta globin, right? And now the oxygen has come out. Well, what the beta globin will do is they will start bonding with other beta globins. And when they do this, they form a chain. It's called polymerization. They form a chain. Well, as this chain continues to grow, it's going to start to put pressure against the sides of the red blood cell, and that's going to cause this change in shape right here, the sickle cell appearance. Once we get oxygen back in, right, it goes up to the lungs and it starts to get oxygen back in, this all breaks apart, and the cell would now, I'm going to go like this, we'll just pretend I'm going to put oxygen in here, and now my cell would go back to being round. Pretty cool, huh? Actually, I should say it's pretty cool, but kind of amazing. All right, and now it's back to being round. But the problem is, if you recall, I said these are fragile. So because they're fragile, what can happen is these can actually break apart. And if they break apart in capillaries, capillaries are very small. And this is where our problems are going to start. Is the first thing that's going to happen is we are going to release the hemoglobin that was in there. Remember our hemoglobin A? I do it like this and like this. All right, I'm not going to draw a whole bunch of those. But now there's my hemoglobin. Well, the liver is going to now release a protein called haptoglobin, which is going to recycle these. But when it does that, a few things will happen, okay? One of the things that will happen is you can get yellowing of the eyes. So I'm going to start talking about symptoms of sickle cell anemia. Okay, those are symptoms of sickle cell anemia. So the first one is you can get yellow eyes due to bilirubin. Okay, you can get jaundice, right? That's when your skin turns yellow. You can get gallstones too. Okay, now the next thing that can happen is, let's take this off. Let's say that this is going to your eye. So I'm going to draw an eye right here. All right, and there's my cornea, and then this is the back of the eye. There's my optic nerve right there. And then in the back of the eye, and by the way, the artery is actually not really this big, the capillaries, but in the back of the eye, you have something called the retina. And so what happens now is if the blood supply to the retina is decreased or cut off, the retina doesn't get what it needs and it can't function as well. So what's going to happen is you are going to get vision problems. Let's say that this artery happens to be inside the arms. Right, it's inside an arm, and here's my arm and my hand. Okay, and that's not a very good looking hand. And now we get this clogging in here. Well, what's going to happen is the fluids that are inside the blood vessel, inside this capillary, start to come out. And they're actually going to end up going into the hands and into the feet, and you can get swelling of the hands and feet. Another problem that occurs with this is normally your spleen is going to break down red blood cells. And your spleen also plays a role in fighting off disease. So here's my spleen. Okay, and what's going to happen now, if the blood supply is decreased, first as the red blood cells come in here and your spleen destroys it, you're actually going to get splenomegaly, so your spleen's actually going to become larger. All right, and then what's going to happen is eventually you're going to get infarction, or the blood supply is cut off and the spleen's going to basically die. So you end up with a dead spleen. Okay, so I'm going to say necrosis of the spleen. Okay. Now, because the spleen is gone, you're no longer able to fight infections as well. So another thing that occurs in sickle cell anemia is an increase in infections. Okay, so you're going to get an increase in infections. The other thing that happens is, like we said, my sickle cells only live about 120 days. So what can happen now is, because my sickle cells only live about 20 days. My red blood cells live 120 days. So what's going to happen now is your bone tries to make up for it tries to make more and more red blood cells. So the bone can actually increase in size. So I'm going to put expansion of bone. Okay, I should make this a capital E right here. Okay. The other thing that happens is, if this is in the lungs, you have passageways in your lungs. You have something called bronchioles, which are very, very small. You probably heard of bronchitis. Well, the bronchioles are very, very small bronchial tubes. And then after that, you have something called alveoli. And the alveoli is normally where oxygen passes from your lungs into your bloodstream. So let's say I have a venule, or part of a capillary right here, and then I have this here. So my oxygen is going to come from my alveoli and enter into the blood, and that's why I have this side red and this side's not. But let's say we start to get the blood vessels start to clog in here, in the lungs. All right, if it starts to do it enough, we call this acute chest syndrome. All right, and this could be a serious condition. So because there's a decrease in oxygen, what the body will actually do is it will actually start to close down the blood vessels. It's called vasoconstriction. And we'll actually start to close these down. Okay? And so that can actually cause problems in itself. The other thing that can happen is if it's in children, because we can't get the nutrients and the oxygen going around the body enough, there can be delayed growth. Right? Children have a tendency to be smaller. And then this unfortunate thing for people with sickle cell anemia also is they have a decreased lifespan. Their lifespan is shortened. So really quick, I mentioned acute chest syndrome. I mentioned swelling of the hands and feet, necrosis of the spleen. All of those cause pain, right? If I'm not getting enough blood supply to those areas, I get pain. So when you have pain that's associated with sickle cell anemia, we call that a sickle cell crisis. Okay, so we call it sickle cell crisis. And this is the pain due to sickle cell anemia. Now, it's not all bad news, okay? In order to get this, I need to have a recessive gene from mom and a recessive gene from dad. So let's look at this real quick. So to get sickle cell anemia, I need to have a recessive gene from mom and a recessive gene from dad. Okay, we call this autosomal recessive, also known as homozygous recessive. This is someone who has sickle cell. Okay, Now, sometimes what will happen is, let's say you got a dominant gene from mom and a small gene or recessive gene from dad. These people won't have sickle cell anemia, right? Unless they get into environments where there's not a lot of oxygen or they're dehydrated, they won't have a lot of sickle cell anemia. But the thing that they will have is the symptoms of malaria. Actually, I'm going to change the word symptoms to the severity. If they happen to get malaria, the severity of malaria is decreased. Okay, so there is an advantage to this also. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of sickle cell anemia. Of course, there's always more to this. And thank you so much for watching.